On a Q&A video, I was asked a question about why Forge World was so special. Forge World was a massive map that shipped with Halo Reach back in 2010. So big, in fact, that Halo still has yet to have a map that tops it in size, even Halo 5's Warzone maps. Bungie originally envisioned the map being broken up into smaller multiplayer maps that players could forge on, but decided to combine them into one large forgeable space. It's set on a Halo ring, features a variety of themes and locations such as water, canyons, caves, Forerunner structures, and much, much more. Back during the days of Reach, it was responsible for the variety of matchmaking maps that would be cycled in and out of rotation and ultimately created a legacy for itself as one of the best things Halo had ever done. I could make a whole video based on the amount of hours and fun I've put into Forge World, the maps I've created, the Forge Worlds I've had when friends come over, the custom games and map variants I'd force my younger brother to play with me. I can attest to Forge World's reputation. It was well earned. But here we are, in the year 2019, and people still wonder why it wasn't ever brought back. Halo 4 had a Forge mode at the same scope of Halo Reach's, but it never brought back Forge World. Only Forge Island post-launch, which fans found underwhelming. Halo 2 Anniversary also didn't bring back the fan-favorite Forge map, instead offering mostly barren canvases and the ability to place terrain. Halo 5 included Alpine as a Forge map, which had similar goals as Forge World, but the community still just wanted Forge World back. Halo 5's Forge maps were all quite varied. They all offered different artistic styles and themes, but the community wasn't happy. Why is that? Why do so many people still find Halo Reach to be the best Forge in the series and Forge World to be the best map, despite Halo 5's superior amount of customization and control over the artist's Forge project? It's honestly not even that big of an issue. It's just something interesting to think about. Let's break down the types of forgers into two categories: cartographers and sandboxers. Obviously, the two categories have varying levels of skill, but I do believe that Forge is used by these two groups. Cartographers are the people who create art in Forge, whether it be a proper map for us to play on, or creations or recreations of things that a lot of time was clearly spent building. Sandboxers I can perfectly describe with a friend of mine, Johnny. As a kid, I loved making maps seriously in Halo 3 Forge. I was closer to a cartographer type. Johnny, on the other hand, is a sandboxer. For him, he used Forge mode less as a map tool and more like a sandbox mode. He'd like to crush me with blocks, spawn every weapon in the game and play with them, and generally just goof off. He went even crazier with Reach, making these crazy catapults by spinning blocks and then having me stand on them. The issue with Halo 3's Forge was that it was designed mostly to modify the spawns and adjust object and weapon placement to alter already existing maps, with some canvas maps added as DLC. Forge and Halo Reach launched out of the gate with Forge World, which was a map large enough to accommodate both cartographers and sandboxers. For skilled cartographers, you had plenty of empty space to make your own maps in the voids between pre-built zones, and for less skilled but still determined cartographers, pre-built zones acted as launch pads for your projects. The terrain and the theme is here. Get to work filling in the gaps and making something cool with them. Now let's not gloss over the menu and tools at the user's control. By utilizing a similar control scheme to theater mode, it meant that people could seamlessly transition to Forge since it behaved similar to theater in control. Simple and accessible menu meets a map that accommodates all types of forgers due to its size and variety of pre-made zones and empty space. Halo 4 has essentially the same tools as Halo Reach, minus a few differences here and there. It has the same UI, structure, and even items you can place. Yet Halo 4 Forge wasn't quite as highly regarded. Why is that? Well, the UI and style of control is similar. The slip up here, I believe, is the maps themselves. At launch, the only map with proper empty space for skilled cartographers was Impact, which was space themed, so no natural environments here. The other two Halo 4 maps were a bit too claustrophobic, and the pre-built zones were so limited and clearly defined that there was little room for lower-end cartographers to make maps with them, since all their maps were essentially funneled into a specific style by how tight and constricted the pre-made zones are. Sandboxers had an easier time, but the constant need to generate lighting meant that the mode wasn't quite as seamless, so it came off as more tedious due to the constant pauses to generate the lighting. Halo 4's maps let it down more than the mode itself. Forge Island did eventually come as post-launch DLC, but it was clearly designed for high-end cartographers, with lots of dead space and little variety in pre-made zones for lower-end cartographers and sandboxers, so it was a map only made for one type of forger. Halo 2 Anniversary had a similar problem, in that its forge maps were mostly blank canvases, which was very good for high-end cartographers, but a bit overwhelming for lower-end cartographers and sandboxers. It didn't help that no social features and easily accessible file shares for the community killed this forge before it even began. Now, we arrive at Halo 5. Easily the most advanced forge mode in the series. It's truly beautiful. It's my personal favorite in the series. The controls and button mappings were reworked for high-end cartographers to allow for much better creator precision than the theater controls of old, and as it stands right now, Forge has a ton of variety in its Forge maps. Some are similar to Forge World, large spaces with empty spaces for high-end cartographers, and little pre-made locations to give lower-end cartographers the creative push they need, while being pretty cool in their own right for the sandboxers to goof around in. Then, you have blank canvas maps with absolutely nothing for hardcore cartographers to go nuts on. And go nuts they did. It's usually agreed on that this is the peak of the Forge mode in Halo, but I still get that odd comment here and there about missing Forge and not really enjoying Halo 5's Forge. I notice a lot of these comments are followed up with personal stories from Reach that indicates that these people are either sandboxers or lower-end cartographers. So what changed to make this not as accessible? I believe in Halo 5's case, it's the focus on giving you as much control over your Forge maps as possible. It's moved away from a map editor to almost its own map creation tool. The controls were tailor-made to give you as many options as possible for maximum control. And for those who don't really need that level of precision, they just had a cool idea for a map on a certain part of Alpine, they get a bit overwhelmed by the UI and the control change. It's too many options for them. And for sandboxers, they don't even know how to get to the weapons menu, let alone place some man cannons to bounce around in. And the interesting part of the problem here is that we simply can't go back to Halo Reach's Forge. Halo 5's Forge is incredible, and is responsible for a lot of amazing creations and post-launch maps. We simply can't remove that level of flexibility. So what's the solution then? If I personally had unlimited resources and time at 343, I would provide two options for players: Forge Prime and Forge Classic. Forge Classic would heavily restrict the objects you have access to in order to not overwhelm you. The controls, while not being as precise as the Halo 5 controls, would be similar to Reach's theater mode style controls to allow for maximum accessibility. And ultimately, it would allow for an easy to understand map editor like the old days, which would allow some sandboxers and maybe lower end cartographers to feel welcomed by the Forge mode again. Sometimes simplicity isn't a bad thing. As for the high-end cartographers, Forge Prime would be exactly as it is in Halo 5, the best tool for the creation of maps and art. I'm the kind of person who would prefer Forge Prime, but there would also be some people who prefer Forge Classic. This is my proposed solution. Halo 5 has a healthy mix of large maps with pre-made locations to forge and goof off on, and canvas maps for high-end cartographers to have maximum control over their projects, and I think a system like this would accommodate all players. Though I'm not a developer, I don't know all the factors at play, or if this is even worth exploring, but I read those comments, and I empathize, even if I prefer the new Forge over the old. Having two kind of modes, one that's more accessible to the casual people, like sandboxers and low-end cartographers, and one that's more in-depth for the high-end cartographers, I think would only benefit everyone, and allow Forge a lot more legroom to stretch. If you enjoyed the video, I recommend sharing it around, giving it a like, maybe subscribe, helps the channel out. Also, if you really wanted to, you can follow me on Twitter.